Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Killjoys. A very, very good episode. Some very interesting developments. We have the team obviously kind of being fully reunited at this point. Johnny having to go through the whole questioning from the lady who's basically kind of like the RAC version of the IA, asking all oh, what's up with all these RAC agents who disappeared? I mean, because everyone's been trying to get the hell out of the J system as fast as possible with the Hullen coming. Just no one's been sticking around long enough to say anything. Because at this point in time, it's you don't really know who to trust. You know, how do you know that you're not just opening yourself up for a can of worms? Because if you tell someone the truth, I mean, it's not like they'd necessarily probably believe you about the whole thing. You'd have to bring them proof and everything. But then by the time that's all said and done, it's they're preparing for war. They don't have time to be caught up in all this BS. The lady's even trying to turn Johnny against Dutch. It's oh, tell me what Dutch's connection is with all of this. You know, I'm trying to help her. It's no, you're trying to find out, you think Dutch is up to something shady and stuff like that. Much like Turin was before, but now they're all working together and everything, so. But this is also Johnny's first time back, and he's meeting Zephyr, and it's turned into a competition of she's super smart and everything, and almost make it it's she's the new nerd, and he's oh, you can't replace me and stuff like that, and it's trying to make it work, but it kind of at odds. I even love at one point she's freaking out, and he's are you praying? She's no, I'm not praying. Shut up, you're praying. Sorry, I just kind of get that anytime I'm anxious and stuff like that. But it's him basically being we are the nerds of the team. We do stuff that Davin and Dutch can't. So we gotta do the nerds. We gotta do the nerd thing, because without us, the team kind of falls apart or whatever. So it's kind of interesting. Johnny was trying to make it work, but obviously he has his own biases against the whole situation, because it's yo, this is my team and everything, and now I come back and my team's different. Obviously, I guess because I felt everyone would be involved, including the two guys that Turin included last episode, but it's no, they're mainly working with Zephyr. I guess all this is still off the books because Turin doesn't know about it. So I was expecting Johnny to be introduced to the other two as well, but those are Turin's guys. Zephyr is Dutch's gal, so it's we rely on, I guess, can rely on all of them. Maybe time hasn't really come for Turin to be okay, Dutch, I'm sending you on a mission with the boys too. So maybe that's something Johnny will also have to kind of get acquainted with, going forward, because he right now he only knows about Zephyr. Not unless they haven't really introduced him to I wonder, does he know about the other two as well, that Turin's oh, you can work with them as well? Have they really informed him about that or not? That might be a surprise in the future. I mean, obviously there's a little bit of jealousy too, because for Johnny, it's Zephyr, it's like I said, she's super smart. Yeah, she's a little awkward. It seems like she doesn't really know. She's not a very tactful person. She'll kind of say whatever's on her mind, not realizing, for her, it's all about completing mission. And that's why Johnny kind of chews her out later on in the episode, because it's you left us. She was no, I was doing that because it's I've had an idea for something, and I left you behind, but it's better one of us get captured, not both of us. But then it's a situation where it kind of basically reiterating why Turin didn't accept her in the first place. It's we work as a team. You and me, we're the nerds of the group. We do what Davin and Dutch can't. So they put their trust in us. So if we're saying to do something, they'll wholeheartedly believe us, because that's what it means to be part of a team, to trust your team. And it's I'm not going to let you put them in danger. So if you're going to send them into danger, you better find a way to bring them out of it. And she's kind of gets a little smart with him. It's oh, is that why you left to protect them? He's no, that's why I'm back. So it seems like he's trying to, I mean, and I think that's something Zephyr needs to learn more of. The fact is that this is a team effort. It isn't just some equation. These are people's lives in danger. These are people that he cares about too. It's you might have just only recently met them, but it's maybe given enough time and spending enough time with them, she'll become acquainted with them as well, to the point that she'll want to. But I guess that's where Johnny, because that's the thing about Johnny. That's what Johnny represents of the team. Johnny represents the heart. He's the one that gives a damn. So I guess it's not just for the team, but it's also for Zephyr too. Maybe he'll kind of maybe that'll kind of rub off on her. So speaking of the whole Johnny situation coming back and everything, Davin kind of points out the fact that, because Johnny's kind of low, he's okay, fine, tell me. The fact is I left it and everything. You're pissed at me and everything. And Davin's dude, I'm glad to have you back. It's not I didn't want you to ever come back. It's just, I was a responsible brother for once. It's I never would have thought that was a thing. But it's the shoe was on the other foot now. He gave Davin so much shit about leaving and then coming back. I mean, Davin didn't even really come back. Johnny had to basically drag him kicking and screaming. But it's like, now the shoe's on the other foot. He's like, you left, and this is what it feels like to leave and come back. You know, you kind of have to take your lumps, essentially. It's like Davin's understanding. He's like, I understand why you left. You had your things to deal with. The fact is that you did leave, so that's just how these things are. But a big focus on the episode is them getting onto the ship and going to the last coordinates that were in it. And it turns out the last coordinates was this planet that basically acts as kind of a Hullen training camp, in the sense of like, it taught Hullen how to act more human and stuff like that. The place is pretty old and everything. There's people there known as the Unseen. Basically, they're blind. It's a whole thing. It's kind of almost a religion based around the whole, and I was referring to them as the Undying. It's like, oh, they're these great omnipotent beings that came and they wanted to learn about our ways and everything. It's like, oh yeah, like they wanted to take time to know about us because they're such caring gods. It's like, no, they wanted to learn how to be more like humans, learn all they could about humans, because it's a lot easier to, you know, annihilate an enemy from within if you're able to imitate them and know all there is to know about them and their weaknesses and how they act. It's a lot easier when you assimilate and you can destroy them from the inside out eventually. You know, but these people didn't really, basically they've lived their entire lives. They passed down from generation to generation believing this whole thing. They even have the whole process of like, because they look at the whole blinding themselves as like a beautiful thing. It's like, oh, this is a gift from the Undying themselves, even going as far as stitching the eyes closed of all their babies so that when the Undying returns, the first sight that these kids will have is of the Undying. That's pretty fucked up. And what's even more twisted is that this was all came from a Hullen himself. Basically, he was told to keep here, stay here. Klein came and shut the whole operation down, like, about, because Klein was no longer in line with the whole like Anila situation of wanting to spread the Hullen around. Because basically he was cleaning up a mistake that he made a long time ago, and I guess in his own way he was trying to find another way around saving his daughter, essentially. Because apparently, like, Klein has shut this down like 30 years ago. So, I mean, I don't know how old Dutch is. I'd assume she's in her late 20s. Maybe she's in her early 30s, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's around the time he met Dutch that kind of changed that, or something went wrong with Klein, because the fact of the matter is he turned against the Hullen, which is a question as to why he did that. I don't think that was ever really brought up what inside of him changed. I mean, it had to be meeting Dutch. Dutch was the thing that changed him, so maybe that kind of added the precursor to all of this. But the moment Klein killed the slime, this guy, the seer, he was no longer a Hullen himself. Like, cause like to him, he basked in all of this because he was secretly a Hullen without letting anyone know. It's like, oh, I'm the last of the seers. That's what I mean, because everyone around him is blind anyway, except for the Guardians. I think they're the only ones that aren't blind. But I guess he just faked it. Maybe it hadn't been that long, so maybe he could just pretend like, oh yeah, I'm just, no one really paid attention to the fact that he wasn't really getting older and stuff like that. Nevertheless. Because even Dutch kind of called him out. It's like, hey, you're starting to feel again. Why would you even care about these people? Because it's like, oh, but then that means everything was for nothing. All these people sacrificed their beliefs, stitching children's eyes shut. It's like, why do you care about them? It's like, you feel again. You care because you're human again. So we also learned more about the whole situation with Davin. Because I brought that up. I was like, they did not reference that at all. Like, oh, Davin, he went off on a ship and he didn't say anything to anybody. I was like, because we're trying to discover they're like messing with the ships and everything. They're like, oh, we don't really know. It's like, but Davin flew. It's like, oh, the reason why it's because something went wrong with Davin and he did it subconsciously. Because even the girl he met this episode, I think her name was Quinn. She's one of the girls with the eyes shut. She was like, yeah, we met before. What are you talking about? It's like, you came here looking for something known as the Remnant. He's like, I don't remember that at all. Which is, I guess, I mean, they explain it as like Klein did like one final thing before he died, kind of a psychic link with Davin he already had. He just kind of tapped into it to kind of, I guess, put some like subconscious, kind of almost subliminal messaging into Davin's subconscious to kind of do this. And so that was the way he was acting upon. I mean, which is scary for Davin, because Davin, Johnny kind of makes a joke about it, but Davin kind of was like, this is serious. Because the last time something happened like this, him not being in control, he almost killed his brother and almost killed Dutch. So he definitely didn't appreciate that. So maybe it was something like maybe the fact is they explain it like that means that maybe that is true. Davin is kind of like becoming more and more of an exception just with everything there is about him, because it turns out that he can actually, because we know that, like, as the audience, because he activated the ship, he got onto it. But Dutch kind of figured it out too, because it was like, because Zephyr was thinking like, oh, it was Dutch's fingerprints that operated the ship. It's like, oh, Dutch has control of all these ships. It's like, no, Davin does. So maybe it's more of like, maybe Klein did something to Davin in those final moments before he died. So now it's kind of interesting, because now you're putting Davin in a position of kind of like, I guess, general, because now he's kind of commander of all these like different like Hullen ships and everything, because he's the only one that can operate them and everything, with like Dutch being like top commander, stuff like this is legitimately forming up to an army, and it's crazy. I mean, granted, we still don't know where like everything is for that particular place. I mean, that seer dude ended up getting blinded by that whole sun thing. It's really sad when you break it down, because it's like they like so blindly, I mean, God, I guess ironic term words in this particular case, but they have such blind faith, and it's just over something that was just some douchebag staying behind and being like, oh, I'm gonna have some fun with it, I'm gonna be revered as a god, treated like a god, and stuff like that. He never really revealed himself as one, but he kept himself in a position as seer, as being like, oh, I'm top dog and stuff like that, I'm so important, and stuff like that. So I mean, he's blind now. He tried to turn everyone against Dutch, because because he's like, if I told them the truth now, they turn against me. So he turned them against Dutch, but they got away. But it's like, where do they go from here? Because now he's definitely blind now. And because he's no longer a Hullen, it's not like his eyes will heal. So what does that mean going forward? Always a possibility of them crossing paths again. But then I wouldn't think so, because I don't think there's any other ships there. There is an older ship that Johnny was messing with a little bit that, like I said, I think her name was Quinn, kind of showed them, but that's about it. So, like I said, once again, they're all blind and everything. So, we will, once again, ironically see where, if anything will ever come about that or not. It's just so sad. Like, you're so devoted to something that you've lived your life a certain way. And I mean, at the end of the day, it means nothing. I even appreciate the fact is that Davin's like, yeah, I punched a blind old guy, and it's like, yeah, I should kind of feel a lot bad about it, but I don't nearly feel as bad about it. It's like, well, the dude's kind of a douchebag, so. But another very interesting side of the episode was dealing with Anila a little bit, in particular her and Delsea. They kind of ended up kind of explaining a little more about the Hullen too, that there are two different strands of the Hullen. There are those who are just meant to serve, and then there's those like Anila who are meant to bark out orders. Basically, I guess, because they were saying basically the ones that was in Delsea were replaced, so I don't know, like maybe like they were initially pumping regular bits into her, but then like Anila came along. It was like, oh, no, what we're going to do is this and pump you full of this other strand of it. Side note, I kept wondering why it sounds so weird. It didn't correlate in my head last episode. I was like, why does Anila sound so weird? Obviously, she has a different voice and just very different speech pattern than Dutch, but then I was like, then it finally clicked in my head this episode. Immediately she started talking. I was like, right, because she's doing an American accent. Like she drops her accent. The actress who plays Dutch drops her accent when she's playing Anila. So I was like, obviously differentiating between the characters. So I was like, okay, because I was wondering, like, because it was just kind of almost like almost ditzy kind of feel to it. Just like, oh my god, I'm having some, like, I'm not going to do it justice, but I don't know. It's just a thing that I just couldn't quite figure out what was so different. I was like, but I think that's what it was. It's just the fact that she dropped her accent, but it just didn't click until I watched this episode. But yeah, there was a dude that was like, yeah, they'll say if you want to say or bring up any topics with Anila, make sure you kind of run through me first, and then they'll say being top brass, like being so conceited and egotistical like she is like, nah, when it's all, nah, like I part of the 9 families, blah, 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 blah. I don't have to do that. Show me some respect. And she basically ends up telling Anila that Klein is dead. She snaps and starts killing people. The dude's like, well, luckily enough, she only stabbed people. I mean, we could recover from stabbing. It's like, oh, but the beheadings and torn limbs, that's a whole other story. So, I mean, there was a shit ton of blood. So, we saw her stab some people, but who's to say whether... I mean, the fact is he brought her... I mean, the way he was saying it, it seemed like she might not have decapitated anyone or cut off any limbs. Just did a lot of stabbing and stuff like that. But he was like, you think you're so high and mighty? You're not one of the 9 right now, so clean up this damn blood. So... from the very beginning, you can already tell what Delcea's whole position in all this is, because she's like, oh yeah, that you can, that you kept accidentally throwing her name in there. She wants power and position. You know, she wants to go back to the 9 and just be like, here, motherfuckers, like, you know, she's like, oh, she's basically telling Anila, like, hey, the 9 will fall underneath you, will follow your orders when you decide that you're ready to kind of take command and everything. It's like, what you want her to do is get the position to you. You want to be the one that rules all the 9. That's what this is all about. So immediately, I think this whole situation kind of put her in her place in the sense of like knowing to be careful what she says to Anila, because Anila is very unstable. Like finding out about her dad being dead just kind of made her snap. I mean, we don't really know what their relationship was like after they both became Hullen. I don't think she actually knows that it was actually her own dad that killed off a lot of the Hullen. When it was all like said and done back in season 2. I mean, Delcea is using this as an opportunity. She's like, oh, like, we can go after basically the person that killed your father. It's like, she didn't actually. She'll probably twist it and make it seem like she did. I mean, the question is, does Anila know about the relationship between Klein and Dutch? And maybe that's why she hates Dutch as much. Not only because she looks like Dutch, which she immediately was like, yeah, we don't even say her name until after she's dead. It's like, ooh. So, because Delcea was like, oh man, I can't believe how much you two look alike. So there's that whole thing, but it's like, does she really know like the connection between Klein and Dutch? I mean, and that is in itself the question too, like, why does Dutch look so much like Anila? Part of me is like, maybe she's some kind of like clone or something. Because even Klein, if I remember correctly, even Klein didn't have the answer to that, why they look so similar. Maybe Dutch was born to kind of bring this all to an end, because it's like, I mean, I don't know, like, you definitely know it's going to be something weird, because it can't just be something natural. It's going to be something obviously super weird as to how she can be, and why they look so similar. They look so similar, like, I mean, I guess, you know, upbringing and stuff like that, because I was, nevertheless. So Delcea is always, she's like, yeah, let me kind of rule by your side, because we're both queens and everything, and I'll help you get your revenge, basically against Dutch. Which she's also going to get her revenge. Is this also going to be against Dutch, or is this going to be against Johnny? Because she talked about she knows exactly where to hit Dutch, her weak point. I would assume it's either Davin or Johnny, which is definitely going to be interesting, considering the fact is that Johnny is Davin is kind of anti-Hullen, so it's kind of like not going to be the easiest, like not going to be easy to get close to her. But I assume Johnny's supposed to be the weakness, especially because Delcea's got unfinished business with him. So I'm very interested to see what that where that all heads, especially considering the fact is that there's that remnant thing that we still don't know anything about. Obviously, Zephyr is going to be like studying it and figure out why it's so important, to the point that Klein, you know, subconsciously sent Davin to pick it up, and obviously it has some kind of key in this whole war thing. So I'm very interested to see where we go from here. Like I said, it's like Anila has finally like 100% set her targets on Dutch. I just hope when it's all said and done, Delcea finally does get what she deserves, because it's like you just cause nothing but problems. It's just like, and nothing against the actress who plays Delcea, just that character. It's just like, oh, you suck. It's like you will never be forgiven after the fact is that you killed Potter. You will never be forgiven. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.